Hey, what's up? I've gotten a lot of comments and questions both on YouTube and in real life, along the lines of how do you study so many languages, or don't you ever get them confused, or don't you ever lose one of your languages if you don't study it for a while? And so I decided to make this video and compile a list of all my tips and tricks and advice, along with a little bit about my routine for how I learn multiple languages at once, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you and giving you some ideas or some inspiration on how to change up your language routine so that you're able to effectively study multiple languages at once. So make sure to comment down below and let me know how many languages you're studying and what you do to keep them separate and not get them mixed up. And also let me know if any of these tips were helpful and if you're going to start using them in your language learning routine. Okay, so first of all, in order to get the most out of studying several languages, it's important to come up with a game plan. Now, if you haven't already seen my videos on my 2021 language learning goals and my video about my bullet journal, I would highly recommend going to watch those because they have a more detailed explanation of exactly what I'm doing for each of my target languages this year. So yeah, I would go watch those videos first. But just as an overview for the first quarter of 2021, so January through March, I'm focusing on 4 languages: French, Arabic, Spanish, and Indonesian. And I'm very strategic about how I study them. Out of those 4 languages, I've categorized them into my priority languages and my backburner languages is what I'm going to call them. So my priority languages are French and Arabic, and those are the ones that I'm studying pretty much daily, at least to some extent, and I'm really putting in active effort to study and learn them. And then my backburner languages are Spanish and Indonesian, and those are languages that I still want to kind of keep as part of my daily life and still improve on them, but I'm not actively seeking out and studying them, I guess, on purpose, if you could say. And so those are going to be the languages that I'm going to focus on much less than French and Arabic, which are my priority ones. Now, there's a few reasons why this type of language pairing works out really well for me. So let's take French and Arabic as an example. So I have studied French a lot longer than I've studied Arabic, and so my proficiency level is way higher in French than with Arabic. And studying them together actually is really nice and complementary because in French, I'm past all the basics. I'm past kind of all those, vocabulary drills and grammar drills. I know how the grammar works, and so I'm never studying the same thing with French that I'm studying in Arabic. In Arabic, I'm still more at a beginner level, and so I'm going over things like basic sentence structure and basic grammar. But with French, I'm already past that, and so I never am tempted to get the two confused. I'm never tempted to get kind of the French learning subjects mixed up with the Arabic ones because I'm on totally different pages for each of the languages. The second reason this works out so well is that the languages themselves are completely different. Obviously, Arabic uses the totally different script than the Latin script that French uses. And aside from that, they come from completely different language families as well. And so there's almost no similarities between the two languages. And so it's very, very hard actually to get them mixed up. And so I can fully study Arabic and put my 100% attention into Arabic for an hour, and then 2 minutes later switch to French and have it snap back really, really quick because there's no confusion between the languages. They're just so different, and I find that really helpful when I'm studying multiple languages at once. And the same thing goes for my 2 backburner languages. Although the gap between my ability of Indonesian and Spanish is a lot smaller than the gap of proficiency between French and Arabic, the languages, again, are very, very different, and so I'm never really tempted to get them accidentally mixed up or anything like that. Plus, since I spend a lot less time on them, it's a lot easier to kind of keep them separate in my mind since I'm not kind of spending all day, every day on the languages, if that makes sense. Okay, so now for how I study my 2 priority languages. So I think the main piece of advice I can give you is to keep things different for each language. And what I mean by that is keep your study plans separate and keep the type of exercises you're doing or type of content you are inputting. Try to keep it as different as possible for each of the languages. So for example, for French, I'm studying on listening comprehension and speaking. And so in order to do this, I'm focusing heavily on watching YouTube videos and practicing speaking to myself, filming videos in French. If you haven't seen my French progress video, go watch that. And it's a lot more kind of conversationally based, whereas in Arabic, I'm focusing heavily on reading and writing. And so I'm reading out of this beginner's Arabic book, and I am keeping track of new or difficult words, and then I'm making Quizlet sets and reviewing those Quizlet sets and learning how to write these words and learning how to read them and make them kind of into sight words. So that's what I'm doing with Arabic. So you can tell that already it's very different. Kind of my learning routine for French is very, very different than my learning routine for Arabic. And this is really helpful, especially say if I get really bored or frustrated with French, then I can still switch to Arabic and studying Arabic, and it's completely different. It's something totally new that it's a really welcome break from switching from one language to the other, and it keeps my language learning part of the brain kind of moving, and if that makes sense. In a way, I'm still learning and I'm still being productive, but it also gives a really welcome break if I ever get tired of one or the other languages, and I can just switch back really easily. And another way you can study 2 languages at once, especially if you're much more advanced in one than in the other, is to study language B with language A. What I mean by that is buying books or watching videos or taking notes in your stronger language while studying your weaker language. So instead of typing how to learn Arabic in the search bar, if you're studying French and that's your stronger language, you can type comment t'apprendre l'arabe, and then that way all your content will be in French, and then you can still learn Arabic using French. For studying my backburner languages, which in this case are Spanish and Indonesian, I mainly do 2 things. Number 1 is listen to music, and number 2 is to follow accounts in those languages. So music is probably my favorite way to passively learn a language. So all I do is I literally just go on Spotify, I find music in my target language, and I listen to it. If I hear a song that I particularly enjoy, then I look up the lyrics. And usually I'll write them down because I find that that helps me kind of remember them better and helps it to stick in my brain. So I'll write down the lyrics and I will try to understand the meaning just based on context. And then if I'm super stuck on a word, then I'll just Google Translate the word until I know the entire meaning of the song. And then after that, I just listen to the song over and over and I practice singing along. Until I have the lyrics memorized and I have, the lyrics and the meaning memorized. And then once I've done that, then it's home free. It's so awesome because then that song goes into one of my everyday playlists and I'm able to listen to it all the time and sing along with it, just like any English songs. I think that's a really good way. It just, first of all, expands my music taste to different cultures, different languages, which I'm always a fan of. It's also fun to just have a playlist on shuffle and then you hear a Spanish song and you're able to sing along with it, and just knowing all the words to a song in another language is just really, really cool to be able to do. Also, song lyrics are really, really hard to forget. So there are songs that I've learned in other languages from years ago that I still have not forgotten the lyrics to, just because song lyrics are one of those things that once you learn them, it's very hard to forget. And so that's another benefit of using music to help you learn a language, whether that is your main priority languages or your backburner languages. And then the second thing I do for studying my backburner languages is to follow social media accounts in that language, or just find little ways to kind of incorporate them into my everyday life without really thinking about it. Whatever I decide to do for these languages, my main goal is just to have them kind of pop up over and over again in everyday life, just to keep them kind of fresh in my mind. And so that way, if I ever decide to make them a priority language, then I still have been exposed to them, and so I'm not completely like shutting out all Spanish or all Indonesian, and then it's a lot easier to kind of gain momentum again when I decide to study them as more of a priority. So just a few things to keep in mind. Do not hold yourself to some standard when it comes to studying multiple languages. If you really want to study 3 but feel like you can only reasonably do 2 at one time, then don't worry about it. Just do 2. You know, if you can only study 1 language at a time, that's totally okay. No one says you have to study multiple at a time. There are times where I just am like, okay, I can't do anything else and I only focus on 1 language. A lot of times, especially as we see like on social media and on YouTube, it's very popular. It's like a trend to study multiple at a time, and I think that's great. I personally enjoy studying multiple languages at a time, but if that's not you, then don't feel like you have to, and that should go without saying. But I feel like it's a good reminder to just do what makes you comfortable, do what is most productive to you, and choose a study plan that is fun and enjoyable for you instead of being stressful and just jam-packed with things that you really don't like doing. Another thing to remember is that it's okay if it takes a long time, and I'm speaking to myself as much as to everyone else, because I know for me, I'm very like, I see all these kind of sensationalists like, oh, I became fluent in such and such a language in a year or in 9 months. And to me, that sounds really cool, but realistically speaking, if you're not kind of immersed in that country and you're not doing it basically 24 hours a day, then you're probably not going to become fluent in a language within a few months or a year. You know, sometimes it takes years and years and years to reach a decent level of proficiency, and so I would encourage you not to stress about how long it's taking, especially if you're studying multiple languages at once, because obviously, you know, your attention and your time is going to be split between several different things. And so for you to kind of be wondering, well, why am I not fluent yet, or why do I not seem to be making progress? It's like, first of all, you're studying 3 languages at once and you've only been at it for 3 months. So I think it's important to have grace on yourself and to study however many or however few languages you want, and take as long as you need, take as much time as you need, and just kind of getting into that mindset for me has made language learning so much more enjoyable. Just knowing that I'm doing it for me and not for anyone else has been the key, I think, to actually myself finding that I'm making a lot more progress that way. And then my only other tip would be to encourage you to do kind of what I was mentioning earlier, which is what I call the opposites attract method for picking languages that you want to study at once. Again, like French and Arabic, they're very opposing languages. So I would recommend that if you are going to decide to do several languages, to make sure that you try to find those ones that are separate. And that's not to say you can't study 3 Romance languages at once. I think that's totally possible. But for me personally, I would not like doing that. And so that's what I would recommend to you. But if that's your cup of tea, then go for it. Wow, well, that was a lot of information, or at least it felt like a lot. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and tell me how many languages you're studying and what you do if you're studying multiple to keep them separate and not get them mixed up. And finally, just remember that language learning should be something that adds to your well-being and doesn't take away. So make sure to have fun with it and to make it into something that you enjoy. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!